I'm reading from Rays of the One Light. These are commentaries on the Bible and Bhagavad Gita written by Swami Kriyananda based on the teachings of Paramhansa Yogananda. This week's reading is titled, What Was the Star of Bethlehem? Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. Divine vision is the opposite of worldly sight. Divine vision sees God's presence behind all outward appearances. Worldly sight sees appearances merely, coding even the blazing wisdom of a saint. A master to the worldly man is a human being with perhaps a slightly better attitude than the norm. The scriptures therefore strive to demonstrate how the divine consciousness, when openly active among men in the lives of great masters, must never be viewed as an expression of ordinary human consciousness. To seek the presence of divinity behind the life of a great master is to prepare oneself to recognize that same divinity also in lower manifestations, until at last one beholds God everywhere. Thus it was that Yogananda, on observing his new disciple, Swami Kriyananda, struggling with the contrast between the Guru's human appearance and his inner divine reality, looked at him deeply one day and said, "If you only knew my consciousness." The story of the birth of Jesus Christ contains an account in the Gospel of St. Matthew of the Star of Bethlehem. The wise men who sought Jesus in his manger said, "We have seen his star in the east, and lo, the star which they saw in the east went before them till it came and stood over where the young child was." This account is important, for it showed all mankind that Jesus was a divine incarnation and no ordinary man, that he brought divine consciousness to earth, even though he would play a human role among human beings, and that others, too, by receiving him in their inner hearts, would acquire power, as the Bible says, to become the sons of God. The scriptures enjoin us to meditate on the lives of great souls, that we may discover our own latent spiritual greatness. As the Bhagavad Gita says, "Who knows the truth touching my births on earth and my divine work, when he quits the flesh, puts on its load no more, falls no more down to earthly birth. To me he comes, dear Prince." Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. I so enjoy this moment of taking off the mask. I know it's wiser to keep it on, but it's such a joy to take it off. This beautiful reading about what is the Star of Bethlehem is particularly interesting because it has beflummoxed scholars for over 2,000 years. Scientists and those studying the scriptures have made all kinds of hypotheses about what that star was. Was it a comet? Was it a phenomena that we can't see any trace of now. And what they should have done is just ask the yogis, because the yogis have a perfectly good answer for what that star was the spiritual eye. And we too can experience that Star of Bethlehem if we meditate deeply enough and become really, truly still in body, mind, and spirit. Then what comes into the darkness behind closed eyes, what comes to this point of Christ consciousness in the body, is that beautiful golden ring. And inside the ring, a lovely dark blue field. And at the center, a silvery white star. If we meditate deeply enough, Yogananda says, we can enter into that golden ring. And when we perceive truly that golden world, we pierce through material existence and we behold the angels and the heavens. It's so thrilling to think that that is our destiny. Yogananda said of Christmas time that even God and the angels celebrate Christmas, this birth of Christ consciousness. They celebrate for the good of all humanity. And when we were chanting Om Christ and the guitarist started playing along with us, I thought, I bet they're singing this in the heavens right now. I bet they're celebrating and playing Swami's chant, Om Christ. Imagine that. That power of imagination, of visualizing, is very important on the spiritual path. Not to start fantasizing about, phenomena that we would like to have happen that isn't happening. It really should be grounded in visualizing what Master has given us and making that real for us. So when he says, God and the angels celebrating, imagine that. Imagine yourself there. Like when we have the all-day meditation, which unfortunately will be just online this year, but there's always blessings in it. Maybe we'll all go deeper that way. In the afternoon, we'll play the Blue Danube Waltz, which was something that Yogananda loved, and he would say that we should imagine ourselves dancing with the masters. And feel that. Feel that in your heart. What would that be like? How would you feel? How would you experience it? Don't just think intellectually about it. I've just, the farther I go along on the path, I realize that so much of the teachings we get from books, which means that people have to read them. And if we read through it, it can sound like a textbook. It can sound like just words on a page. But the reality of these spiritual experiences is so far beyond that. We read, for example, about going breathless. And you read this and it's all sort of, okay, well, you go breathless. And don't be afraid, it's just a natural phase. But if you get even a little taste of what that is, it's so overwhelmingly joyful. You can't breathe because it's so blissful. And that's the part that we can only sort of get a feeling for very delicately. It's only when we taste it that we know. Just like when someone says, if you've never seen an orange before, and they bring you an orange and they say, this is really good, and you go, it's bright orange, it's so strange looking, and it's all kind of bumpy and tough skin. No, it's really good. It's sweet and it's tart at the same time. What? How could that be? You cannot taste it until you taste it. And then you know. And then words are superfluous. There's no need for them. So how do we do that? How do we start to taste that divinity? Well, God remembrance as the affirmation is so important. Because what we put our minds on, and what we fill our minds with, to a very great extent, is what we become. It's what we find in life. If we are thinking materialistic thoughts and I always go back to this, but forgive me, it's something I struggle with. Well, if we're looking at the news every day, sometimes I think, what is this going to get me? Am I going to be born in Washington, D.C. or something next life? I mean, what? Just stop. I can't do anything. But I like to be a little bit informed, so I just have a feeling for what's out there. But I'm just cutting the time down and down and down. Put that time on God remembrance, because that is what will stay with us. That will determine our future births, if we have to have them. It will determine what we become. Put your mind on God. And this beautiful passage from the Gita, who knows the truths touching my births on earth and my divine work? That means study the lives of the saints. When I was a little kid, I don't know why, but I just loved the saints. And I had a little kid's picture book of the saints, and I would go through it and read all these stories. For me, they were the superheroes. They were the ones who had transcended all the physics of this world. They could do all kinds of things. And they truly are superheroes. So when you study the lives of the saints, you start to see what is possible. The yogic philosophy, of course, says that you'd start to develop siddhis, powers. You can become infinitely small. You can become infinitely heavy, or any object can become infinitely light. There's all sorts of things that these masters can do. But the true superpowers that they have is that they can control themselves. They have so much willpower. They have so much strength. They have power over nature, power over other human beings, in the sense that they can change energy. There's a story about St. Ignatius, who founded the Jesuit order, and he was quite a powerful human being and great saint. And he lived in the day when if you wanted to get a letter to someone in another country, it took months by ship, and then months for them to answer and get a reply. And so St. Ignatius's monk secretary said to him, okay, the ship is leaving at dawn, and we have to write all these letters to, our monasteries in other countries. And St. Ignatius said, no, it's the time for me to die. I'm ready to die now. And his secretary implored him, no, you can't die yet. You have to finish writing all these letters. Imagine, you're about to leave your body. Even being conscious is fantastic. But then Ignatius said, okay. And he sat down and he dictated through the entire night all of these letters to all of his monasteries. And at dawn, when the secretary had to go and chase the ship and get these letters on the ship, Ignatius said, is that all of them? Yes, that's all of them. Okay. And then he died. Study these amazing stories, not because they happened to people hundreds and centuries ago, but because that's where we are going. The beauty of Christ's birth is that Christ consciousness is born in each one of our hearts in a unique and beautiful way. God alone has the blueprint for who we really are, what we will become. We just have to put our hand in his hand and go through all the trials, all the misunderstandings, all the political upheaval, all the illness, all the tragedy that happens with trust and with faith, knowing that God's ways are not our ways, and we don't see the big picture. Only God sees the big picture. Swami tells a story of a woman saint in India, and when she was very, very young, like 10 or 12, she decided that she wanted to be in seclusion, and she convinced her family this was a good idea, and she walled off her little room. She had a tiny little opening where people could talk with her and give her some food. She just remained in seclusion for the rest of her life. And people would come and seek counseling and healing from her and received miraculous healings. Well, her own father was very ill and near death, and her mother implored her, please, you have to heal your own father. What is wrong with you? Why can't you see that he's nearly dead and you have to heal him? She had been asking for healing for some time. And the daughter said, no, it's just not the right thing. And her mother was adamant, shall we say, begging, crying. And finally, the daughter relented and said, you will see what happens. This is not the best thing. But she did heal him. And he got well and strong and physically robust and started drinking and got into all kinds of mischief, and it was really not the best thing, and did not have a happy death. So let us trust in God's idea. The more that we can put our faith in Him and awaken that devotion. Remember, Sri Yukteswar said, devotion plus Kriya Yoga plus techniques will bring you to God. It works like spiritual mathematics. So we have the tools and we have the energy. We have to manifest that devotion, deepen that devotion. And what could be sweeter or more provoking of divine love than the image of holding a newborn child? When we hold in our hands that miracle, what could be sweeter or closer to heaven than that? And so let's visualize that gentle sweetness, that innocence, that heavenly love awakening our hearts and filling them with the presence of Christ.
One time, a sort of odd question came into my mind, and I decided to ask it to the powers that be, the Googles of the universe. I asked the question, where did the Big Bang happen? Which may seem like an odd question, and it may seem even very much more odd that it applies to Christmas, but the answer came back right here. And, you know, I'm which was not the answer I was expecting, but the explanation was, you know, when we think of like the Hubble telescope or one of these space telescopes that's looking back across time, because the farther and farther you see, the earlier and earlier in creation, in the history of creation, you're looking. And they can see, I mean, you know, some of these telescopes can see back to the first few 100 million years of creation. I mean, back to the time when stars were being formed. And, you know, that's a long, long way. That's 13, 14 billion light years away. That is a heck of a long, long way away. So I was figuring, okay, well, you know, they're going to sort of direct you through the cosmic highway back to, you know, some spot that's a long, long way from here. Well, no. The Big Bang happened right here because there was no space when the Big Bang happened, which means that the Big Bang happened everywhere. And the light of God expanded into our universe from everywhere. Yoganandaji gave us this beautiful little aphorism in the autobiography of a yogi. Divine vision is center everywhere, circumference nowhere. And that's another way of thinking of, you know, where did the Big Bang happen? Well, it happened everywhere. It happened here. Well, it's also a way of looking at the light of Christ, that the light of Christ is everywhere. And another way to say that is the light of Christ is inescapable. It's in each one. In the Bible, the light that, and I'm going to have to paraphrase this unfortunately, but that illumines every person, every man in this world is that same light. And to everyone who receives that light is given the power to become the sons of God. And that line is quoted, and Swamiji quoted it many, many times, and it's also forms part of this reading today. What is it to receive the light of Christ? you know, do you sort of kick your feet up on the lazy boy chair, shift the little gear shift and put your feet up and say, lay it on me, let me have the light of Christ? Well, I mean, it helps to say the words, it helps to sort of direct our energy. But really, what it is we have to turn and face the light. Or like Nirmala is saying, and the reading says, we have to remember God's presence in our lives. And we have the power to choose. That is, in fact, the power that we have. And she's referred to a number of saints, and I'll also segue to that to say, what is a saint? Master said a saint is a sinner who never gave up, which is to say a saint is someone who kept on saying yes to the divine light, kept on turning to that light and using its power to manifest their lives, to manifest God's will in the world. There's a kind of, scientists and space technologists or rocket scientists are always trying to figure out ways to propel these rockets that are lighter and lighter. I mean, literally lighter and lighter, because one of the ways is to shoot photons at something, at a huge sail, like a solar sail, they call it. And I mean, a photon, the force of a photon is not a whole lot. It's not, I mean, I've sometimes wondered when you climb on the scale in the morning and, it's like, I want to keep the lights off because I don't want any photons hitting that scale, clip my fingernails and, it's like, let's go for the lowest common denominator here. Well, it's not a lot of force coming out of a photon, but you get a whole mess of them and you spread out this gigantic sail across hundreds of meters in space. And the continuous force, and there's nothing slowing it down in space, it just keeps going faster and faster and faster. And that's, in a sense, what a saint has done. By saying yes, by using the light of God, by tuning into that light, it keeps on flowing more and more and more vigorously. And so thinking and reflecting on the life of Christ historically is valuable, because that walk of life is, in a sense, the walk of our soul. And looking at Master's life and Swamiji's life too, we had the chance to observe the life of a saint very closely. And for me personally, it wasn't so much the human personality, because it's easy to get attached to or sort of caught up in the drama that a human personality has to go through, but rather to sort of feel with Swamiji what I did. My own practice with Swamiji was I listened to all his words, but I tried to understand, why is he saying what he's saying? Why is he saying what he's saying the way that he's saying it? So that it wasn't just, as Nirmala was saying, words on a page, because, many of the talks that Swamiji gave are transcribed. You can read them, you can kind of understand in a certain way what is he driving at. But to be with him in the room was to feel a kind of electricity, a kind of magnetism, an uplifted consciousness. He could be talking about something very basic. He could be talking about how many books to print on the next print run of the new book that he's coming out with, or whatever. I mean, it could be very mundane, because a human being has to deal with all levels of life. I mean, Swamiji gave financial advice, not very often, but when he did, he meant it. And it was relevant, but what was even more relevant was the spirit behind that. And for me, that was a musical experience. which is to say that, and Swamiji himself said, if you want to know me, listen to my music. And I've often thought, and occasionally said, if you want to feel what his consciousness felt like to some degree, sing his music or perform his music or become an instrument for his music, because some of that consciousness will start to play through your life. Nirmala and I have often remarked that Swamiji's music has given us a wellspring of power and grace to move through our lives. And it comes out in odd moments, in odd ways. You know, this in the fire ceremony I was mentioning before we began chanting the mantras this morning, the words to "The light that was Christ. In darkness did shine, 'twas the light that formed the heavens." And all of these songs, they have this moving grace that comes through. Jyotish one time was describing, he said, Ananda is in some ways more of a song than an organization. It's more of an artistic expression than it is a organization with, a hierarchy and this and the other thing, because it's this living, breathing, moving expression, and that's what the life of a saint is, and that's what the life and the light of Christ was and is. Because the birth of Christ, yes, it's this amazing, beautiful experience that came 2,000 years ago, but it's also right now. We, all of us, are expecting the birth of Christ. We, all of us, are worshiping and asking for that consciousness to be born today, right here and now, not just thousands of years ago. Yes, it's beautiful to celebrate that. I'll just add something to the story or the question, what was the Star of Bethlehem? The Star of Bethlehem was Christ. It wasn't just an abstraction that we see in deep meditation, or which isn't an abstraction, but the visualization of it can be a little bit of an abstraction. But that light literally became him. That, in other words, the wise men were guided not by some comet or something they were looking at up in the sky. They were guided by Christ himself, because when that light came to the place where his birth happened, it became him, which is, this comes from a scripture called the Revelation of the Magi. And it seems consonant with our path and our teachings. In fact, if you were to express some of these principles in language that sounds 2,000 years old, that's what it would sound like. And anyway, I just found that deeply inspiring and very much here and now. Because it's easy, Nirmala and I were talking the other day about how culturally challenging it is. When a master comes, they have to relate to the culture in which they live. They can't just express pure abstraction, because people either ignore it, or they go to sleep, or they say you're crazy, or maybe there's other possibilities too, but whatever it is, it's not relevant. But then when they do express the truth according to the culture that they're in, then people tend to limit it to that culture, that time, and we have to tease out of it the universal principles to make it relevant here and now. And this is one of the reasons that masters keep coming again and again and again, because otherwise humanity gets fixated on, but no, he said that, and he's the one, and this is it. And we have to be reminded. We have to be guided in a new expression. And Master came to show us, how do you do this in an age of energy? Christ came at a time when You had to do it in a world of form, a world dedicated and absolutely positively limited by form. Now energy's moving. We're trying to get into the flow of that energy. Let us remember God and turn to the light. Best way to turn to the light is every morning and every evening right here in Kriya Yoga, in deep meditation. Dive into that light and commune with that light. Get a sunburn from that light if you have to. Whatever it takes. Get your vitamin D from it. But dive into it in such a way that it is a continuous expression, a continuous living manifestation in your heart and in your life, because then there's no possibility of forgetting it. It's the only living reality for us. When we live that way, then life is the most beautiful dream and drama and joy. And we can share that with everyone, and it never diminishes. In fact, it increases. Usually we worry about what we share. Am I giving too much here? Is somebody else going to feel like they didn't get enough, or whatever it is? You share the light of God, and it increases in this world, and we can all be instruments for that light.